Hi, everybody. My name is Reba Gordon, and I'm a librarian in Florida. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce young adult author Brigid Kemmerer, the author of 13 young adult books. And I'd also like to take a moment to first thank Book Depository as well as the Hong Kong Book Festival for making this all possible. All right, Brigid, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brigid Kemmerer. Thank you, Reba, for that lovely introduction. I am a YA author. I have written books that span from fantasy, like the New York Times bestselling Cursebreaker series that starts with A Curse So Dark and Lonely, to YA contemporary, like Letters to the Lost. I also have some paranormal YA titles, and I cannot wait to talk about how much fun it has been to write across all of these different genres.
All right, so our very first question for you is, what did you do before becoming a writer?
So that's a great question, because I did not start out as an author. You know, I grew up loving stories and I love to read. And you and I have had many conversations about books and the books I loved as a child. And I think one of the most important things for me, and I love telling this story to librarians and teachers, is that when I was a kid, when I was 12 years old, my mom would always take me to the library. I was very much a bookish kid. We moved a lot. I was always the new kid, so I loved the library. And I remember when I was 12, there was this one librarian who, I swear, she knew every book in the YA section, like much like you. And she was amazing. And I remember at the time, she would talk to my mom, you know, as I was browsing the shelves, and she, you know, finally said, you know, I'm an author myself. I have a book coming out. And my mom said, we will buy it. We'll buy 100 copies. You know, we love you. You know, you're amazing. And of course, my mom did buy like a dozen copies. And I read that book, and it was The Silver Kiss by Annette Curtis Claus. And it's a YA vampire novel. She also wrote Blood and Chocolate, which is even better known. But I loved The Silver Kiss. It was just one of my favorite books. And it was such an influential moment for me, because it was the first time that I realized that a normal person could be an author. Like before then, it was like, oh, an author, you know, and it was really eye-opening for me. But, you know, you can't really just be an author. It takes a lot of writing. It takes a lot of work. You know, once I got out of school, I started working in finance, which has nothing to do with books, until, you know, I finally sold my first novel and eventually got to a point that I could quit the day job. So that is my writing history.
That's what's always so fascinating to me, is that you have such amazing books. I am such a huge, huge fan, and you are so incredible with writing characters, and I feel like you have some great insights. But yet the very first thing that you did as an adult, your first job, was in finance, which I don't know if people would necessarily connect with, you know, being a creative author. So that's just, it's always fascinating to me.
I always liked numbers, and I like working with people and talking to people and helping people. So it was okay.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm glad you weren't miserable. Okay. So as you're in finance and you're thinking about becoming a writer, what made you want to write YA?
So the first few books that I wrote when I was in my 20s were actually adult romance. And I had the very first book that I landed an agent with was an adult paranormal romance. And that book did not sell. And at the time, you know, I loved YA literature. I'd been reading YA all my life, even as an adult. And I just had this idea for this story about these four brothers, you know, controlling the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And I knew it would be better as a YA novel. So I just started writing it that way. And I remember at the time I was good friends with Sarah Mass, and this was before she was even published. And I remember we were emailing back and forth and talking about, stories. And I said, I started writing this YA book. Would you mind taking a look? Like, do you think that, can I pull this off? And she read it and said, no, this is great. Keep going. And I did. And that ended up being my first published book.
Okay. Can you tell us the titles of the Elemental series?
Sure. The first book is Storm, then Spark, Spirit, Secret, and Sacrifice. It's a 5-book series.
And I know that you have some fans who have some very deep feelings about these brothers.
Yes.
That they love them.
Yes. I love my 4 Merrick brothers. I think about them sometimes from time to time. I have a few ideas because people often ask me to write stories about their adventures as adults. And I have a couple story ideas, but one day, maybe.
Okay. How many secret projects can you possibly have, Brigid?
I know I'm up to 3 secret project lists on Spotify. I think that readers and people who follow me on Spotify would be like, okay, come on, lady.
Oh, give us a little something. Okay. So you actually brought up a good point. You mentioned Sarah Moss, right? So before she was a published author, and of course we've heard of her. We're going to jump ahead in our questions, which I have over here, in case you're wondering if I'm staring over there, is how have your author friends helped you throughout the years? Like having people that you can reach out to who are at different stages of their career and the whole publishing process, as well as, not editing per se, but giving you ideas. How has that helped?
So author friends, I could not do this without author friends. And someone told me way back at the beginning of my journey, and it's something that I often say to aspiring writers, is you'll have, writer friends in the beginning as you're trying to become a writer, but don't ever expect to do things together. Because there are just different points in your career where different things are going to happen. Someone might get an agent right away, and then their friend might take 2 years to get an agent. And sometimes that can feel really heartbreaking that one person has an agent and the other person doesn't. But then maybe the person who takes 2 years to get an agent gets their first book deal is $500,000, but maybe the other person, their first book deal is $10,000. There's never... If you try to do things at the same level and at the same time, it is just going to end up in someone being disappointed somewhere in that cycle. And, and there's no need, books are not like vacuum cleaners. Someone doesn't buy one and then not buy another one for 5 years. You don't need to be in competition with other writers. And it's so important to have somebody, there's so many weird parts of the industry that it's so important to have somebody kind of along for the ride who can say, oh no, you know what? That's not how it worked at my publisher. Or, oh, that's totally normal. Call your agent about that. That's what they're there for. And anybody outside of publishing doesn't quite get those nuances. So having author friends is crucial.
I imagine it's helpful having them read your works before they're published too.
Yes. Especially once you kind of build a readership, you do have to start being, and especially once you're under contract with a publisher, you have to be very careful about who you share work with, who, you don't want anything to get pirated. You don't want early editions leaked online, things like that. So you do have to be a little bit more careful about who you share things with.
I didn't even think of that. That's crazy. Okay. All right. So we know that you haven't always written in one genre. So can you tell us what's it like going from realistic, like Letters to the Lost, to like the Cursebreaker series?
So I love writing in different genres, mostly because all of my stories are very character based. I love really chasing the character, the internal, angst, the turmoil, the drama that people are going through. And I often say that, if you strip away the magic, the curse, the castle out of A Curse So Dark and Lonely, you're just going to end up with, a contemporary YA about, 2 boys trying to cope with loneliness, honestly, or, a girl, you have a girl who comes from Washington, DC and lands in a fantasy land, that could just be a girl coping with her mother's illness and, not knowing who to turn to and meeting these two boys. I really love looking at the human condition from a lot of different angles. And with fantasy, you can wrap it up in fun things, sometimes make things a little bit more accessible. When I was writing Curse, I started writing that in 2016. And no matter where anyone falls on the political spectrum, the US election was happening then. And I think when Donald Trump won, no matter who you are, I think a lot of people were surprised, whether they were voting for him or not. People were surprised. And it really rocked the world of a lot of creatives. And I'm no different. And it made me really think about, like, what are the obligations that rulers have to their people? What kinds of things can we do as individuals to help each other versus things that might not make broad scale change? And I think one of the great things about fantasy is that you can make those kinds of topics really accessible because you put them in another world, especially for teenagers. You can really think about these things in a way that doesn't seem to contradict what they may be hearing at home, what they might be learning in school, but just gives them a different way to think about those kinds of topics. And then with contemporary, contemporary is a really safe way for teenagers to experience things that might be scary or unnerving or, even amazing. It's a really safe way for teenagers to experience the emotion of first love or losing a parent or dealing with a friend who's in an abusive relationship. All these kinds of things can really be explored in the contemporary realm. So I love that whole spectrum. That was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
No, but it's fascinating because I was introduced to your work, to your writing with Letters to the Lost, and I was in love. Right. It's just incredible characters, incredibly written. You touched so delicately, but effectively on important and potentially painful topics. Right. And then I read A Curse so Dark and Lonely, and I'm reading that and I was like, oh my gosh, this author is amazing. I've got to look them up. And oh my gosh, it was you. It made me, I couldn't believe that the same person had written this beautiful contemporary book and also this immensely fascinating, fantasy. I think that speaks a lot. Your answer explained a lot, saying that no matter where the story takes place, it's basically just, humans. It's just relationships. That brings us up to another question is then what does the research process look like for you? So if you're just looking at relationships, how is it different, or how do you do it, or how is it the same for your realistic books versus your fantasy books?
I love writing research. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love giving a character an interest that I know nothing about. In Letters to the Lost, for example, Declan is really into restoring old cars. It's something that he did with his dad before his dad made some really poor choices that are explored in the book. And I know nothing about restoring old cars. I barely know anything about modern cars. So, giving Declan this interest meant I really had to read a lot. I had to talk to people who were into restoring cars. And it's funny when you write about something you don't know about, you almost have to do a book's worth of research just to write a few lines. Because if the character's an expert, you can't write dialogue that's like, as you know, Bob. And I would have to go to, car people and say, all right, what's a really common thing that people think they know is wrong with their car, and tell me everything you can about how you would fix it. And then I can kind of filter that down into character dialogue. And with contemporary, you can research a lot of really real things in an easy way. There's a sequel to Letters to the Lost, which is called More Than We Can Tell. And I have a character who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I personally have never, prior to researching this, I had never done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I knew nothing about it. Seriously, I just knew it was a form of martial arts, but I knew it was really important to the character. So I signed up for 6 weeks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons. And It was amazing. It was amazing. And what I learned through doing that experience, as well as it was an abused character. So I talked to a psychologist about like what kind of, how that abuse would manifest as a teenager. And I kind of put these two bits of research together to form this character who could access the very real human need for touch in a safe way that would allow him to feel empowered. And just the research kind of sometimes comes together really beautifully that way. But that's all contemporary. Fantasy, fantasy is fantasy, right? Like, how do I research? I don't know. What kinds of plants would make a good medicine? And twinning. And a lot of it I make up when it comes to fantasy. And it's very funny to me, and also a little bit fun when people will email me something and be like, I cannot believe the intense amount of research you did into blank topic. And I'll be like, thank you so much for noticing. And it'll be something that I completely made up, like out of nowhere. And sometimes I'll mix and match, especially in fantasy, because fantasy gives you the room to do that. I will say, so in Defy the Night, which is a book where there is an elusive flower that cures a disease, there are some things in this book that are real. And then there are some things in this book where I'm like, oh, that sounds like a pretty name for a plant. I'm just going to use that and mix and match, but I will say in fantasy, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I needed to research that was real.
Sea shanties?
Yes, I'm listening to sea shanties for a future project.
Secret project number 2? I don't know.
It is secret project number 2 because it's going to involve some pirates, some time at sea. I'm trying to do some reading on, pirates and piracy. I try not to look at history too closely because I don't want to write historical fantasy. I want it to feel very just completely different. If I want people in togas carrying machine guns, I want the artistic freedom to do that. So I try not to like link myself to fantasy.
So timeless.
Yeah, exactly. I try not to link myself to a timeline too closely.
Okay,
but there's nothing wrong with historical fantasy. I know a lot of authors love it, but that's just not a genre I write in.
You need more freedom. You can't be.
I do. Yes.
Okay. And we're thankful for that. From listening to your research answer, it sounds like your realistic books, the research can happen in person a lot of the times, right? Mm-hmm. And fantasy seems to mostly be online.
Yes.
So my question to you is, and we'll talk about Defy the Night in just a moment, would you say that the reason why you're writing primarily fantasy books just right now is due to the pandemic and the fact that you couldn't get out of your house to go and do research in person?
That's a really good question. I don't think so, though. I think that I have kind of found a bit of a niche in writing fantasy right now. And I'm really enjoying writing fantasy right now. I have, numerous books under contract to do it. I would love to get back to contemporary one day.
I'm all tell us more. No,
I'm not allowed yet. I'm sorry.
All right. So let's talk about Defy the Night. This book is incredible. I absolutely love it. And it's funny, you mentioned in A Curse of Dark and Lonely about the election and then dealing with world leaders and people who rule a country. Defy the Night came out in the middle of, a pandemic. And
it's not out yet, but I was writing it.
Right, writing it. Sorry, my bad.
It comes out September 14th.
September 14th.
Yes.
Okay. So September 14th it comes out, but you were writing it in the middle of a pandemic before the pandemic started.
Yes.
And yet there are elements that people reading it now will be like, oh my gosh, how did she know? Like there might be certain things. But before I say anything else, why don't you tell us what Defy the Night is about?
Sure. So Defy the Night is my next book. It's my 13th YA novel. It is a brand new fantasy. It's unrelated to the Cursebreaker series. And it is about a kingdom called Kandala that is ruled by a vicious king and his younger brother, Prince Korik, who is basically the court executioner. And the reason the king and his brother need to be so vicious and so brutal is that there is this disease that is kind of overtaking the people of Kandala. And the only cure can be made from this very expensive flower called the moonflower. Now, our heroine is a girl named Tessa Cade, and she has taken it upon herself to become an outlaw, and she steals this moonflower so that she can distribute it to people who can't afford it. And her best friend is a boy named Weston. He is an outlaw with her, and they're very, very close friends, and sometimes Tessa wishes that he could be more. But then one day, West does not return from a supply run. And when Tessa sets out to try to find out what happened to him, she ends up breaking into the palace and discovering everything she thought about the cruel king and the horrible Prince Korik might not really be true. And if she wants to help save the people of Kandala, she might need to start a revolution herself. And I love this book. I'm so excited for people to read it. I can't wait. I can't wait. And it did, like I said, this book, the research into this book was very different from A Curse So Dark and Lonely. You know, so much was made up. But then also I had to look at, you know, how would electricity work? Because certain people have electricity, and like, where would the power come from? You know, what kind of weapons would they have if they've advanced to the point of some people having electricity? You know, how would they make the medicine? How would they distribute the medicine? All kinds of things like that.
Oh, okay. And I just want to say this cover is gorgeous.
Thanks.
Absolutely stunning. I love it.
It's one of my favorite covers.
Now, I've also heard a rumor that this is one of your favorite books that you've written. Is that true?
It is one of my favorite books.
Now, is that one of those things where it's like the most recent book is your favorite book?
I mean, I have to say my most recent book is my favorite book, and that's the one I'm working on right now that I can't talk about. So we'll just stick with this one being my favorite book.
Would that be Secret Project number 1, 2, or 3?
1. Secret Project number 1.
Okay, excellent. Can't wait for that. All right. You're so much excitement. All right. What advice can you give to aspiring writers?
I would say, other than what I said before, definitely don't try to do it at the same time as anyone else. I would also say, you know, not to worry too much about your word count or seeing what other people write, you know, in a given day. I know I am 13 books in, and I will still see somebody be like, I wrote 16,000 words today, and I will feel like a complete failure. And that's really hard to get away from. And again, don't look at other writers as your competition. You know, their 16,000 words don't matter when I've written 1,500 words or whatever. I would also say, you know, every time you sit down to write, try to write at least 250 words. Sometimes it's really hard. You're staring at a blank page. And my rule of thumb is to just crank out 250 words. They don't have to be great words, but that will often get you going to get the writing going.
Okay, so you're mentioning 250 words, 1,500 words, 16,000 words. That may not, you know, how do you translate that? How many words is a novel?
So I can tell you that Defy the Night is around 120,000 words.
Okay.
So is A Curse So Dark and Lonely.
Okay.
You know, your YA fantasy is generally going to run between 100,000 to 125,000. Contemporary, Letters to the Lost, is 85,000 words.
Okay. So 16,000 words, how many pages would you think that is? Can you even?
It's usually about 250 words to a page. So 250 into 1,000 is 4 times 16 is 64,000. 66
pages.
I'm doing too much math in my head, staring at a screen and making myself sound like a fool. All
right. Okay, so
16,000 words, I should have divided it, would be 4 pages for every 1,000. So 64 pages.
Oh, you got it right, by the way. You got it right that first time.
The first time I said 64,000 pages, and that
we knew it was the 64 pages. Okay, so I can see why it's important to not compare yourself, because if someone's like, I just read 64 pages, you know, and you're struggling with 250, but at least you know you're doing something. So don't give up, basically.
And also, let's not compare my math skills now to me saying that I worked in finance.
I'm still impressed you got there. Okay. I'm very impressed with that. So where do you write?
Right here.
Right there.
Either at my kitchen table or downstairs in my gym/office, or on my bed, or in my husband's office if I'm really desperate for a quiet room. But then I have to look at all of his Star Wars memorabilia. So
wait, is that distracting or upsetting?
It's neither. It's overwhelming.
Overwhelming. Okay. Good. Glad we clarified that. All right. So really anywhere, have laptop, will travel.
Yes. I just need coffee and earphones.
Okay. So you must be very happy that the world is opening up a little bit and you can go back to coffee shops.
I kind of am. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So that's good. Okay. Let's see. Oh, are you a pantser or a planner? And I'm going to let you explain what a pantser and a planner is.
So a pantser is somebody who does not plot out their entire novel from the get-go. They just kind of have a rough idea, you know. I can't even, I want two kids to meet in a cemetery, and just sits down and starts writing. And there's nothing wrong with starting that way, but sometimes you will get halfway into the novel and realize that you need to add different plot threads, or you need to make changes, or you need to build things out. Where some people will plot right from the get-go and will plan everything in advance and spend a lot of time like reworking an outline and figuring out, exactly how they want that story to go. In the beginning, I was very much a pantser. I would write by the seat of my pants. I would say, all right, I have this idea. Let's see what happens. And my books ended up being too long, too rambly, too windy, like no linear plot to speak of. And I needed to fix that, really. And it wasn't until I sold Letters to the Lost, which was the first book that I sold on proposal. And usually what happens when you're early on in your career is you write the entire book, and the publisher buys that whole book from you. When I sold Letters to the Lost, this was book number 7 for me. And by that time, I had an established career. I'd proven that I could finish writing a book. And I sold this on proposal, which means that I had written about 40 pages, and I had to provide a full synopsis along with it. And that is the first time that I had to write basically an outline, a synopsis is an outline, and submit those things together. And after I did that, I was like, oh, this is better. It's
like a forced plotter.
This is better. Yes. I'm a bit of a forced plotter.
Okay.
Yes. And even now, like I'll write a loose synopsis, and then I will end up deviating from that synopsis every single book, but as long as I have the big plot points that I want to hit, it really is very helpful.
Okay. You're talking about storylines and characters and keeping things all straight. So let's talk about some of these characters that you've written. I'm sure that there are some that you absolutely love, like maybe love more so than others. Is it hard to have bad things happen to them, or to leave them and move on to an entirely different book where you don't have to think about them anymore? I know that you love Ren from A Curse So Dark and Lonely.
It depends on the character. My characters live in my head forever. As I was talking about earlier, I was talking about the Merrick brothers from the Elemental series. The last of those books published in 2014. And I still think about them from time to time. Like, would I redo their book in a different way? Would I make changes to their book somehow? If I wrote a continuation, what would I do? Their secret project number 4.
Oh, great.
And there are scenes There are scenes that I write that even still years later are very unsettling to me when I think about them. There's a scene in A Heart So Fierce and Broken, the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, where Prince Ren makes a choice involving Gray, and I still think about that choice that he made. And it's still upsetting to me. That was probably one of the most upsetting scenes I've ever had to write.
Same. I mean, as a reader, same. It stays with me. So I get that. Was it hard to have a beloved character act like make a choice that, well, basically to be a jerk? I'm just going to say it.
It was hard to write it. Anytime I have to write a scene with a lot of really intense conflict, this is going to sound so silly, but I will sit and type with my eyes closed because I can't look at the words.
Really?
Yes. And sometimes, yes. And I was doing this earlier. I was writing a scene of intense conflict between two characters, and I just had to close my eyes and type. And sometimes I'll open my eyes and see a few words, and I'll have to change the screen and look at something else for a minute. It seems so silly. I don't know why. But it's almost like the conflict is just all inside me.
Wow. Well, and I don't know if everyone knows this, but Brigid's a crier.
I am such a crier. I will cry at anything. It's a miracle I have not yet cried on this recording.
I'm a little disappointed, actually. Let me see if I can find some really.
What should we talk about that'll make me cry?
How can we make you cry? That'd be great. No. All right. Let's go. In fact, I don't even know how long we've been talking. Do you?
I don't. I feel like I don't know.
I don't know. I don't want to go too long, but I mean, I'm having fun, and I'm learning so many things.
Thanks. My BFF.
My BFF. All right, now I'm crying. It's a cry. We got it. All right.
I do think we've been talking for about half an hour.
Okay.
At least.
Good. So we have more time. I'm going to let you try and figure that out while I look at the questions here.
I
like how we kept track of that.
Why? Yeah. Also, I feel like Zoom will cut me off after 40 minutes.
Well, we're still here. So it hasn't been 40 minutes yet. So that's good. We're still good. All right. Let's see. You told us about, so Defy the Night is coming out next September 14th.
Yes.
But can you tell us a little bit about your most recent book, of course, which is the third in your Cursebreaker series?
Sure. So A Vow So Bold and Deadly came out in January. So this is a 2-book year for me. And I wrote almost the entire book during lockdown, during the pandemic. And, I'm aware that this is being broadcast, this recording is being broadcast in Hong Kong. So I don't know, what it has been like to live through the pandemic there. I can only speak to how it was here. But in my state, Maryland, which is very close to Washington, D.C., we were locked down pretty severely right from the beginning. You were not allowed to really leave your house. If you were driving, you could be stopped and asked, where are you going? They had, state troopers at the state border. I remember because we had issues with something to do with liquor stores where people were crossing the state line to go to liquor stores in Delaware, and state troopers in Delaware were stopping them from crossing the state line just to buy alcohol. It was a very weird time to be alive. And it was a very tense environment in which to try to write something. So I really did throw all of that emotion into A Vow So Bold and Deadly when I was writing it. And I love that book. I really love how it all came together. It was definitely a book about characters kind of finding themselves and figuring out a way to bring everyone together. And I'm glad it was a book that I was working on during the pandemic.
And you wrapped up the Cursebreaker series. And I know a lot of us would like to still know more about that world. We don't want to leave that world. So can you give us any little hints as to whether or not maybe we might be hearing more from some of our favorite characters?
I will give you the same answer I have told everyone else, is that I am not saying no. Cannot confirm, but I'm definitely not denying it.
Okay, she did not say no. All right, perfect. That's all. All right, I got that. We'll pretend it's a secret project and go with that. This is good. Okay, so what is a book that you recommend that's a YA book that you read? Because I know that one thing that authors do try and do is to read all the time.
All the time.
All the time. So what's a book, now not one that's coming out, because I'm going to ask you that next, but what's a YA book that you recommend that's already been published?
Oh my goodness, so many. So if someone is looking for YA contemporary, I recommend pretty much anything by Bill Koenigsberg. I love Openly Straight, one of my favorite books ever. I love The Bridge, which is, I believe, his most recent title. It's fantastic. I also love books by Jeff Zentner, Miranda Keneally. I love YA contemporary, just some amazing books out there. If you're looking at YA fantasy, I absolutely love An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. I almost always recommend that book. It's just one of my favorites. I love anything Jennifer Armentrout writes. She's a fantastic author. She has titles. She's similar to me, where she has titles spanning from contemporary to paranormal to fantasy. She also writes in adult, new adult, YA. Yeah, Jen is amazing. I'm
reading Grace and Glory right now.
Oh, are you liking it?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
And recently I loved the Remnant Chronicles by Mary Pearson. The first one is The Kiss of Deception. And those were just amazing. I could sit here and ramble about books I like for
forever.
We could fill the whole hour with that, honestly.
You know what? I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear that, because it's always fascinating to hear what authors recommend, you know? Okay. So can you tell us, this gets a little tricky, but can you tell us about an upcoming book besides Defy the Night that you would recommend that we look out for?
Oh, wow. Okay. So Beasts of Prey by Ayanna Gray also comes out in September. Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, that also comes out in September. Those are the two that I've read really recently that I really, really enjoyed. My Contrary Mary might have just come out this week. That is by Brody Ashton, Cynthia Hand, and Jody Meadows.
Okay.
And yep, those are probably my three recommendations.
I feel like we need to pause so everyone can rewind and write down all of those titles. I know I'm going to have to do that. So thank you very much, those recommendations. That's awesome. We know Defy the Night again, but what is coming up for you next?
So I have two books coming out next year in 2022. And unfortunately, right now, one of them has a title. The other one does not. And I'm not allowed to talk about either one, but soon.
But two.
Two.
That's excellent. Okay. So we'll theoretically be able to hear about that soon. So that's good. I have a silly question for you. Can you show us something that is near you? Just for fun. Authors are people too. Let's see.
As I mentioned, I'm sitting at my kitchen table. I have a water bottle, but that's boring.
That's boring, yes.
I have one of my kids' finger puppets.
Okay, that's good.
I have swim goggles. What every mother needs on her kitchen table.
Yes. I feel like that is a YA novel all on its own. Swim goggles, little alien puppet, and a water bottle, and go.
Vinyl gloves.
They're perfect. Now you have everything you need. So this is wonderful. Oh my gosh. Okay. And can you tell us something, because we love you so much? Can you tell us something about you that maybe other people don't know? Not
Sure.
A scary secret. We don't want to know a scary secret.
Something that people are always surprised to learn about me is that I was adopted as a baby. I am very, very close to my adoptive mother, and I'm not ashamed of it or anything like that. But yeah, that is probably something people are often surprised to hear.
There you go. That's good. That's a good one. All right. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Brigid, this has been absolutely amazing.
You're amazing. Thank you for doing this. No, you're amazing.
No.
And everyone watching is amazing. I am so grateful to everyone for taking time to sit and listen to us.
Well, to listen to you, because really that's why everyone's here. And I definitely want to encourage everyone to get Defy the Night. This beautiful book is coming out September 14th.
Thank you. And if anyone, I have 12 other books out there as well.
Yes.
Spanning genres, something for everyone.
That's right. Yes. And read them and see if you can see the difference in research. That would be really fascinating. Like, what's it like in this genre versus that genre? I love it. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule with 2 books coming out this year and 2 books coming out next year. And I'm sure that everyone at the Hong Kong Book Festival is absolutely thrilled. And thank you again to Book Depository and the Hong Kong Book Festival. And I hope to see you soon, Brigid.
Thank you so much, Reba. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you, Book Depository. Thank you, everyone in Hong Kong and the Hong Kong Book Festival. I hope you all have a wonderful time.
Bye.